Welcome to today's Tuesday talk by Shree Shakya on net zero emissions, costly commitment or social need in case of small economy developing country. Shree is an associate professor at the Institute of Engineering at Tribhuvan University in Nepal. There, he is furthermore the director at the Center for Energy Studies and coordinates the master program on energy systems planning and management. His disciplinary background is in engineering with a particular focus on low carbon development strategies. As such, he has been advising the government of Nepal and international organizations on several strategies, particularly on biomass, energy efficiency, and net zero emissions. We are very happy to have him here as a fellow at the IASS, and he will stay with us until the end of 2021. Before we start, just a quick reminder, we are recording this session. And now, please, Shree, the digital floor is yours.
Thank you, Akeem. Very good afternoon, everyone. First of all, I'd like to thank IASS for giving me this opportunity. So basically, today I'll be talking about this net zero emission, whether it is a costly commitment or social need in case of small economy developing countries. So in this presentation, I'll be talking about a little bit background from international and national perspective, then a little bit about this methodology for use while developing this low carbon development strategy, net zero emission strategy. Then I'll be talking about the GHG inventory for the country and different scenario analyzed for net zero emission strategy development. And then I'll be talking about investment requirements, societal benefits, and end with the concluding thoughts. So regarding background, everybody knows that this GHG emission is one of the major issue at present. So as per this UNEP report in 2019, it shows that the estimation shows that by 2030, the estimated GHG emission exceed from the target set at present. So in order to limit this global this warming by, at 1.5 degrees centigrade by end of the century, as per this Paris Agreement, so we need to reduce GHG emission at the rate of 7.6% annually. So basically, different mitigation measures had been proposed and planned. It basically focused on reducing energy service demand, that is improving energy efficiency, decarbonization of electricity, electrification of end-use services, reduction in agricultural emission, and other carbon capture and storage technologies. So in case of Nepal, it's a small economic country.
Quickly, are you already sharing your presentation? If yes, we cannot see it. Otherwise, I'm sorry to have interrupted you. So.
Sorry, let me see. Okay. Akeem, is it working?
Yes, I can see actually your screen now. Okay, now we can see the slides. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. So while talking about this GHG emission, if you
but you might want to put them on full screen. They're probably easier to see. There you go.
So in case of Nepal, GHG contribution global GHG contribution of Nepal is very small. It's 0.06% as compared to its population share, that is 0.37%. But however, the impact of climate change is very devastating in case of Nepal. So Nepal is ranked among the top 10 countries which is vulnerable to the climate change effect. As you can see from this picture, that this is a drastic melting of glaciers. There's a loss of high frequency of this flash flood, drought, and several this climate change related activities. So regarding Nepal, commitment with this net zero emission strategy, Nepal has been playing an active role for realizing this commitment, and recently it has submitted this revised nationally determined contribution in December 2020, and there it has country has aimed to set long-term vision to create decarbonized society and net zero emission strategy. So by analyzing various options for transitioning into the low carbon economy based on national circumstances, and of course considering common but differentiated responsibility and respective capabilities. So while talking about this net zero emission strategy development, this strategy has been developed based on this IPCC guideline for estimating GHG inventory. So various GHG mitigation potential has been assessed considering different energy and non-energy sectors. Under the energy sectors, residential, commercial, industrial, transport, and agriculture sector were considered, whereas under the non-energy sector, this agriculture, forestry, and land use, waste, IPPU, and other sectors were considered. So this low emission analysis platform has been used for analyzing this nature emission strategy development process, which basically use different driver variables like demographic parameters, population, urbanization, economic parameters like GDP share, which will directly affect the end-use service demand of energy and non-energy sectors. So basically, this model consists of this end-use service demand transformation process, which basically consists of transforming from primary energy to the secondary and tertiary energy, and resource analysis, and other non-energy emission analysis, and ultimately different scenarios has been developed to know what will be the GHG emission in the future ahead. So this is the this breakdown of energy sectors. This is non-energy sector. I don't want to go through it in detail. So this is the GHG inventory estimated for 2019. So it has been found that in 2019, so the total GHG emission is nearly 15.2 million tons CO2 equivalent, where energy sector constitutes nearly 1/3 of the GHG emission, and remaining by non-energy sector. In addition, the GHG sink, carbon sink is somewhere around 15.2 million ton, which is basically from this forestry sector. So while doing scenario analysis, altogether 3 major scenarios have been analyzed. So first one is reference scenario, where it has been assumed that there won't be any policy intervention to mitigate GHG emission. And another scenario is with existing major scenario, WAME scenarios. In this scenario, it has been assumed that GHG mitigation measure, which has been already mentioned in the existing policy document, has been considered. And another one is other optimistic scenarios with additional major scenario. Here, the additional mitigation measures has been considered, which has been already practiced in other part of the world. So these are some of the scenario assumptions. It has been assumed that under the reference scenario, GDP growth rate will be 7%, population 1.35%, urbanization 2.8%, and so on. So under the reference scenario, it has been observed that by 2050, the GHG emission of the country will be nearly 3 times more than 2019 level. So non-energy sector was the major contributor in 2019, whereas by 2050, energy sector will be the major contributor. So regarding technical feasibility of GHG emission mitigations, the policy documents of Nepal has mentioned different targets, and all those targets were considered while developing these mitigation scenarios. So based on those, this policy document target and other targets set by different government and international organizations, these measures have been developed. So under this WAME scenario, with existing measurement scenarios, these are the target based on the existing policy document. Under WAME scenario, these are the target based on additional measures which has been implemented in other part of the world and which is feasible in the context of the country. And this is for the non-energy sector. So while doing this analysis, it has been shown that the country will be able to reduce nearly 43% of its baseline GHG emission by 2050 under the WAME scenario with existing major scenario, and nearly 70% of GHG emission by 2050 under the with additional major scenario. So this is a very good sign. But when you look at this financial feasibility, while developing this major abatement cost curve over this planning horizon, it has been observed that different measures are quite attractive in terms of long-term economic benefits. It has been found that, interestingly, it has been found that this average marginal abatement cost for nearly 2,000 million ton of CO2 equivalent avoidance is this minus $0.4 per ton. So this is along with this planning horizon till 2050. However, if we look from the investment perspective, so there will be significant requirement of investment to reap this economic benefit on the long run. As you can see from here that nearly 23% of national GDP in 2030 has to be invested, nearly 18% in 2050. For the small country, this is a very challenging part. So in terms of energy security, as Nepal imports 100% is fossil fuel from the third country, neighboring country. So because of this net zero emission mitigation measures, there will be significant reduction in imported fossil fuel. That will lead to the reduction in this saving of foreign currency for importing the fuel. It shows that nearly 16.4% equal to the GDP amount will be saved for avoiding this imported fossil fuel, and which of course support to improve the trade balance of the country. So in terms of the indigenous hydropower resource development, so this under this net zero emission strategy, it has been seen that because of this mitigation measures implemented under the net zero emission strategy, there will be additional demand for hydropower. Somewhere around 35 gigawatt of hydropower will be required. And one of the very interesting part is that actually this hydropower can act as both source and sink, and it depends upon the location of the hydropower plant, climatic condition of the hydropower plant. So in case of Nepal, the study has found that hydropower, storage type hydropower can even act as a sink for carbon dioxide. So it is very good news. So I mean, if you consider that sink, the hydropower development under this net zero emission can even sequestrate nearly 3.4 million tons of CO2 equivalent by 2050. So in terms of air pollutant and short-wave climate pollutant emissions, it has got very positive results. It shows that as high as 89% of this air pollutants and short-lived climate pollutant can be reduced under these GHG mitigation scenarios. So if you talk about this, air pollutant like PM10 and PM2.5, it shows significant decrease in these PM2.5, especially I would like to focus on PM2.5 because that's one of the major cause of death in case of the world and in case of the Nepal, country like Nepal. So let me, as per yesterday's, the death due to COVID in Nepal is 7,000 deaths. But if you look at the death due to this air pollutant, we'll be surprised to see that nearly 42,000 deaths occur in the country because of this air pollution. And in case of the world, it is 6.6 million in 2019. So while staying at IASS, we have further developed and analyzed this model, and we have seen that by using this IBC calculator, because of this mitigation, consider in clean cooking, efficient lighting, electric transportation, nearly 11,000 deaths can be avoided in 2030 and 24,000 deaths can be avoided in 2050. So that is a very significant social contributions. So these results, I would like to summarize this result based on this result. So these are the concluding thought. So net zero emission strategy is a global need, not the necessity. If we were to maintain 1.5 degree temperature rise by this end of the century. So definitely, especially for a small economic country like Nepal, it is very investment intensive in the short run. But if you look at the long run, it can be an economically beneficial investment, as we have seen from marginal Abatement cost curve. So basically, investment in these net zero emission projects are investment for the future generations. So definitely, there is a significant potential to mitigate GHG emission in developed countries like Nepal. But in order to realize that, there is a need for global support because a small economic country may not be able to invest in this kind of project. And of course, The co-benefit related to social benefit, like reduction in air pollution, reduction in death, may surplus net zero emission related measures on the short run, because climate change and the effect of climate change cannot be experienced in the short run. That can be studied on the long run. The thing we emit will affect our next generation. We may not be able to see its full effect. So definitely, there is a need of awareness development among the decision makers to implement these net zero emission strategy, which has got multiple co-benefits, and that should be acknowledged. And definitely, so co-benefit related to climate change mitigation measures can be a major driver for the implementation of net zero emission strategy. So with this, I conclude my presentation. Thank you for your suggestion and comments.
Thank you very much, Shree, for this comprehensive presentation. Just as a quick note, if you would like to have a question or comment, either use the raise hand option of Zoom, or raise your hand or write it into the chat. I try to keep an overview. And I have already the first question, and this is from Mark, please.
Yes, thank you, Achim. Actually, the first two questions, if it's okay. And I'd actually ask them one after another so that Sriraj can answer in between, so they don't get a little interfering with each other. So, but thank you, Sriraj, for that update on your work, and that for many people, that overview of what you're up to, and some insights into the situation in Nepal. So the first question I'd ask about is one that links to actually what I just talked about in the talk before this. I also made the comparison of the numbers of air pollution deaths and COVID-19 deaths over the past year in Europe. And interestingly, it's the flip side of that for the situation in Nepal. So there have been 7,000 COVID-19 deaths and typically 40,000 air pollution deaths per year in Nepal. In Europe, there have been 700,000 COVID-19 deaths so far, and typically about 400,000 deaths due to air pollution per year. So 10 times as many per year due to air pollution, but 100 times as many due to COVID-19 over the last year. And I point out, of course, that really making these comparisons it's not a fair comparison. It's not that we're comparing one with the other and saying that one should be dealt with at the expense of the other. It's more of getting an idea of what kinds of impacts on the whole these have in terms of one number, which is premature deaths. And there's many, many other numbers to consider, and what kind of a difference in attention is being paid to the COVID-19 pandemic and to air pollution. And that perhaps this is an incentive to understanding what kind of benefits we could get from paying more attention to to air pollution issues. And of course, especially what's really important to think about is, of the 7,000 COVID-19 deaths in Nepal or the 700,000 in Europe, it's more the number of avoided deaths that have gotten all of the attention so far. But we don't have a good number for that. In Nepal, if you hadn't done such a good job of keeping it out over the first, I think it was 6 months or so before it really started to blow up, there probably could be 10 times as many deaths due to the COVID-19 pandemic if it hadn't been worked. And same thing with Europe, maybe twice as many or 3 times as many if there hadn't been all the measures. So I'm just curious to hear a little bit more on your thoughts about that, in particular in terms of the challenge of making a comparison like that. And if you've done that with Nepalese audiences, how has it come across?
Thank you, Mark, for a very thoughtful question. Actually, what I mean to say is that this single bullet can solve all the problem across the world, actually, right? In the case of developing country like Nepal, one of the major cause of this, death due to air pollution is indoor air pollution. People don't have a ventilated kitchen. They use old biomass kind of thing, so which emit lots of PM 2.5. So in case of Europe, this is advanced, well-developed country. Here, most of the people use electric cookers. So under our this mitigation measures, we have considered that there will be electrification of cooking activities. So that will directly mitigate the emission of PM 2.5. So, and we have used this LEAP IBC calculator model, where we can calculate, it will consider both the local emission and this rest of the world emission. and they will use different exposure function to link the date and emission of PM 2.5. So in this way, it has been analyzed. Definitely, what I mean to say is that issue can be different as per the different countries' context, different countries' economic condition. Geolocations and all those things, in my opinion. So what I mean to say is that while developing this kind of strategy, we should also focus on local condition, local need, local environment.
That makes a lot of sense, certainly focusing on the local context. Maybe we'll talk offline sometime. I'm curious also about your cultural experiences of presenting these kinds of comparisons. But the second question that I have is a shorter question, but a harder question, which is, should we really bother to put much attention, much effort, political effort, industrial effort, and social effort into mitigating climate forcers in Nepal? It certainly makes a lot of sense to put the scientific effort into understanding them, to categorizing them, to doing what you're doing and having the basic information. But when we get down to that basic information and we see that the climate forcers from Nepal, or the CO2 emissions in particular, are 0.06% of the world's CO2 emissions. But the air pollution deaths in Nepal are 10% as large as the air pollution deaths in Europe. There's such a huge necessity for work on adaptation in Nepal. Wouldn't it make sense politically to put all of the efforts right now into reducing air pollution and considering reduced climate forcer emissions as a co-benefit of that, and into adaptation, and to actually advise policymakers to not put too much effort in Nepal specifically on reducing climate forcer emissions, but rather leave that as the effort that needs to be done in other parts of the world? It's a very provocative question. I'd be curious on your thoughts on that.
Exactly. I really agree with you as well. I mean, in my opinion, there should be integrated strategy development, as we have already seen that this GHG mitigation strategy is directly affecting this air pollution strategy, right? Air pollution strategy is directly affecting this GHG mitigation. So if you can combine those kind of synergize them, I think we can solve the two problems with this single solution. So one of the major messages of this analysis is also the same thing. I think there should be integration among different strategies, so that we can share our let's say resources and solve the both problem as far as possible. And besides that, as we have already seen, that this net zero emission strategy also help to other countries, other let's say policy measures. For example, hydropower development strategy. Government is highly emphasizing on developing hydropower resource. And a study like this can show the future market for hydropower. If Nepal is going to commit to that net zero emission strategy, then there should be also development of hydropower sector. Then both national and international investor can invest in that hydropower sector. So in that way, if you can convince the decision maker, I think we can realize these kind of mitigation measures in our opinion.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Shree.
And I'll have to say farewell. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Bye, Mark. Okay, anyone else have a question, comment, or want to provoke something? Kätchen, please, yes.
Thank you for the presentation. I was wondering, and this might not be fair from what you know, but you seem like the person who might know better than any. I thought that this 20 to 25% of GDP investment, if we take CO2 reduction as the goal, was a really interesting figure. And I'm wondering if that percentage of GDP actually is a constant across different societies, if you know that, because you would have a situation in Germany, for example, where the GDP is much higher, but then the investment actually is also much more extreme because of the industry that is here and the cars and the transport and all that stuff. So I'm wondering, do you know anything about that? Is this a number did you derive this number for Nepal, or is this a number that is somehow circulates or has any cross-cultural constancy to it?
Actually, this GDP has been used for any service demand projection. As we know that, any service demand depends upon this income level growth. As income level grow, people use more service-oriented activities. People use more energy-consuming activities, and it's depend on population. So we have assumed certain GDP growth rate as per the government projected. GDP, right? They have a 3-year plan, 5-year plan. Based on that, we have projected out any service demand, and based on that, this our model has analyzed what are the resources required to fulfill that demand. And we have estimated that cost based on this demand side investment cost, supply side investment cost, and fuel cost, and all those costs.
And is there a sense of where that money would come from, or is it simply like, here's what we would need as a way of trying to convince policymakers to put energy and money in that direction, or is there a feeling of how that would be done?
So that is the initial investment. So in order to get those figures, government is in the process of developing this nature emission action plan. So while developing the action plan, they will allocate all those budget. Okay, this much budget will be invested by the private sector, by government sector, or FDI. And you're very much right. We can also use this top-down model, like CZ model, to know the actual effect on the economy because of this nature emission initiatives. So under the CZ model, they consider all the sectors. So that can be also done in the future research activities. So it will give, as you have, it will give a clear picture, because while doing this analysis, we have used bottom-up model. It doesn't consider other sector of the economy. As we know that if one sector in economy changes, it will also affect in other sector as well. And we can do that kind of analysis as well. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Any further questions, comments to Shree and the situation? This presentation, of course. If this is currently not the case, then I would have a question. And just also, as Mark brought up the comparison with Germany and with Europe, in Germany, there are lots of, or let's say not lots, but quite a number of local level conflicts about increased renewable energies, particularly wind power in Germany. But there's also, this has been also the case in other places around the world. And you mentioned in your presentation that hydropower will become an important source perhaps in the future, which I associate now with damming, with flooding of whales and so on and so forth. And that would be, let's say, the two-part question. First, did I understood this correctly? So there will be more damming. And second, how is the population, how is the people, how is the society responding to that? Or so, I mean, are there conflicts? Is it all accepted? How is it going?
So thank you, Akim, for a very insightful question, actually. In fact, in case of Nepal, hydropower is one of the major source of renewable energy in Nepal. So, basically, the only source of electricity, cheapest source of electricity is the hydropower. So nearly 100% of electricity generated from hydropower, except a small plant of the diesel-based thermal power plant. So that's why government has come up with this hydropower development policy, where they have envisioned that by 2030 they will install at least 15,000 megawatt hydropower plant, and they have also planned to install nearly 10,000 megawatt solar and so on, in order to maintain the energy mix in the power sector. So in case of Nepal, hydropower is the only option, in my opinion, cheapest option to produce electricity. And in this nature emission strategy development, most of the electrification process is by the hydropower. But that might be different in case of Germany, because Germany has got other sources as well.
Mm-hmm. And this is just to ask, is it more or less a national, let's say, consensus? It will be hydropower. And if there are, let's say, for example, local NGOs who would oppose them, this does not exist or so? So it will be hydropower, full stop?
Those kind of things happen sometime. Actually, definitely. There's an issue regarding, inundation of these large areas while developing hydropower reservoir, right? So there are lots of issues while relocation of the different communities from one place to another place. But since that is the only option, government and society is accepting hydropower is one of the major source of AC generation. Otherwise, they have depend on imported fossil fuel, usually very polluting and expensive. For your kind information that this foreign currency spent for importing the fossil fuel exceed foreign currency earned by exporting commodity from Nepal. You can just imagine how much foreign currency has been spent just to import the imported fossil fuel. So in that sense, government and people are shifting towards hydropower, and there are also different small scale hydropower as well in the villages, in remote areas like micro hydro, so below 1 megawatt, and the large capacity hydropower installed at the remote places. So that's why there will be less opposition by the people. Generally, hydropower are located in remote places, and those hydropower which are located near the communities, near the villages, they will face those kind of problems.
Okay, thank you, Shree. Are there any further questions or comments right now? Or other topics you would like to raise? Going once, going twice. Okay, if there are no further comments and questions, then we can conclude today's Tuesday talk. Thank you very much, Shree, for the comprehensive presentation. And I look forward to see you again, actually, hopefully in the garden for coffee to deepen the discussion. And now I wish you all well and have a good afternoon, and see you around one way or the other. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.